You've landed on planet 412. I'll be your captain of sorts as we navigate this strange, cryptid-filled world. Join me on the quest for truth, through the strange, mysterious, and supernatural. This is Planet 412.
And welcome to Planet 412. I am your host, Matt Emsch, and I wanted to first and foremost say hello to everybody in the comments section in the chat. How you guys doing? Hey, Masochist Mouse, good to see you there. Bill W. and let's see, Squirrel Games is in there. Let's see who else. It says we've got 13 people in there, so I just want to say hello. Hey, Rye, how you doing, brother? Good to see you there. We got Rye from Codega's Codex of Curiosities in here. This is going to be a good show tonight, guys. I have been advertising this now for a few days, and I'm really excited about doing this tonight. So Dr. Baranchock is well known as an author and also as a Ph.D. And we are going to, hey, Wembley, we are going to be having some good discussions tonight. And I don't want to keep him waiting too long. We're just going to bring Dr. Baranchock right in. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you, Matt? Thank you for having me on. I'm honored.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, I'm the one who's honored. You and I have, I think we've known each other through just groups and stuff over the last year and a half or 2 years. And, something that I've wanted to do is get you on the 412. And I'm super excited that you're here tonight.
Sure.
We are going to discuss some things that I definitely know some of our listeners are not familiar with. But before we get into some of the discussions, did you want to give a quick, little hello and quick little bio on who you are and what's going on here tonight?
Sure. Hello to all you folks in the chat and watching this later on. My name's John Baranchock. Been squatching about 7 years. About year 2, I decided to write a book. Maybe let me backpedal. I got my Ph.D. in psychology, specializing in neuropsychology and pain psychology. And while I was in my private practice, decided I wanted to trout fish again, and start looking for trout fishing maps, and came across the BFRO map and signed up for one of their expeditions. And that's how I started squatching. Lori Wade and Charlie Raymond are the two main folks I've done most of my squatching with. And C. Wayne Tothrow is a group that I remain pretty active in. I tried to count them up once, the number of hours out in the woods looking for Sasquatch, not camping, not driving to the spot. And I came up, I think it was about more than 350 hours actually looking, and then I stopped counting. My interests, I kind of feel like the strange thing for a retired psychologist to say, but I kind of feel like I've got a split personality, a multiple personality when it comes to squatching, because the experiencer in me wants to have that class A. I've had a couple of ass puckering class Bs that I'll share tonight, but I've yet to have a class A. And so I'm still looking for that class A, still getting in the woods, trying to have it. I've got something going on this month and next month. And so, you never know what's going to pan out. But my bias, so the split in me is the experiencer who wants to have the Class A encounter And once that to be enough proof that Sasquatch exists as a species, but the scientist in me knows that from the Patterson-Gimlin film, the scientific community has already rejected video footage, still photography, self-reports, pictures of footprints, casts of footprints that have been confirmed as Sasquatch by, I think, Dr. Meldrum, among others. And so we already know that science isn't going to accept those things. But yet, as a community, that seems to be our primary research focus, is going out there, getting photos, getting recordings, having experiences. But the scientist in me understands that science isn't going to accept that. And if your goal is just to have an experience, I think what we're doing is fine. For having experiences. If you have any investment in scientifically proving Bigfoot as a species, we're going to have to get into numbers. Numbers is the language of science. And our observational science, we're not attaching any numbers to those. We analyze it through our own opinions of whether it's legitimate or not, whether it's a true Sasquatch, whether it's a true recording of a Sasquatch vocalizations. But we don't put any numbers to those to share with the scientist. And so in my book, what I'm promoting is using psychological science and psychological experimentation to be able to get some numbers, to run some statistical analyses, to speak the language of science in the hope that that's going to be more acceptable to them.
Now, one of the things that, and you and I discussed this about with coming up tonight, about the observational versus experimental that's been butting heads, obviously, for years. And, with your book, you obviously have come to blows, you know what I mean? Just nicely.
Sure.
With some people out there. Could you explain to everybody, what your view on that is and why some people have kind of pushed against that mindset?
Well, for one thing, I think from the Patterson-Gimlin film, that kind of set the gold standard for Bigfoot investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody follows suit. Boy, look what these guys got doing this. Let's follow suit. And I think if that had gone on for 5, maybe 10 years, I think that's good. But when you look at other sciences, physics, for example, they start with observational science. Newton observing the apple dropping from the tree. But eventually, they don't, Newton didn't continue to just go around watching apples fall from a tree. He began to run experiments. And so in most sciences, they transition at some point from observational science to experimental science. And in experimental science, the irony of the chasm between the two communities is we're already not that far apart, at least in terms of what I lay out in my book. I talk about experimenting with the Bigfoot phenomena. So the experiential expeditions and the experiential community is necessary because they lay the groundwork for us in identifying the scientific community in identifying the phenomena, where to look, and what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as scientists, we're also still out there looking for phenomena. It's just that we're going to approach that phenomena slightly different on the front end and on the back end of how we analyze it and validate it. In empirical observational science, basically every expedition could be thought of as an experiment, but what we're doing is we're going out and getting pictures, recordings, and so on and so forth. And again, based on the Patterson-Gimlin, and then we validate and analyze that data through sharing it with people on Facebook, sharing it with other colleagues, and eventually, the debate begins. And authenticity and validity in the empirical observational sciences basically comes down more often than not to opinion. In experimental science, what you're doing is you're starting by forming a hypothesis. Let's say Bigfoots make tree knocks.
Mm-hmm.
And when we hear a tree knock, we hear a tree knock in the woods, it's probably a Bigfoot, not a human.
Right.
Well, how can psychology help tackle that? So you set up an experiment in the field where you go pretty deep in the woods where you wouldn't expect a lot of human traffic, a lot of human activity. Area X comes to mind, and some of these other researched areas. And you begin to make tree knocks. And if you get a response, that's a hit. If you don't get a response, that's a miss. Ideally, at the same time, somebody is in town where we wouldn't expect a Bigfoot to be and only humans to be.
Okay.
And they're making knocks in town. And you record how many human knocks you get back. You get one back, it's a hit. You don't get one back, it's a miss. Then you compare the Bigfoot group to the human group to see which group is producing the most knocks. As a Bigfooter, I think I would expect to get more knocks from the Bigfoot area. And if the Bigfoot area, through your statistical analysis, is got a significantly greater number of knocks than the human knocks, that then begins to provide scientific evidence that it's Bigfoot making the knocks. Mm-hmm. Because you're controlling for the human knocks by measuring them downtown.
Right.
If the downtown knocks are greater than the Bigfoot knocks, then we got to be a little bit more careful about what we interpret in the woods when we hear a knock, because that outcome tells us that humans can be a pretty significant source of knocks.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And, I'm glad you brought up the part about humans and the knocks, because let's be honest, because of social media, because of, the entertainment world, there's a lot of people that are hearing people make knocks, and now they're being the response and that factor these days. So I'm glad that there are some studies that are taking that into account.
Yeah, I'd also encourage the listeners to think about what psychology is able to do and has already done, and why it's such a good fit with Bigfoot. What does psychology do? What was it founded on? It was founded on measuring emotions, behaviors, and thinking. Okay. Now, you can see emotions, but you can't go into a person's brain and visualize those emotions from their brain. You can see you can see the results of intelligence, but you can't do an autopsy on somebody's brain and figure out how intelligent they are. You can't feel or touch that raw intelligence. You can only feel or touch the product of that raw intelligence. And so what psychology has been able to do is quantify emotions, quantify behaviors, quantify intelligence, 2 out of the 3 of which you can't directly quantify out of the gates.
Okay.
And so that sounds a lot like Bigfoot to me. Bigfoot is hard to see and touch. Okay. It's elusive. We see its behaviors, but it remains an enigma. And so to that degree, because it's hard to put your hands on Bigfoot, but we can more readily put our hands on the phenomena associated with Bigfoot. By using those phenomena associated with Bigfoot and doing experiments with them, we can get more frequent data. And because of statistical analysis, the results won't just boil down to who's somebody's opinion or who has the loudest voice or who has the most prestigious credentials or background. The decisions about what's going on is determined by the data, the numbers in the data. And that's what's going to make experimental Sasquatch science more objective and valid, because we're relying on those numbers, and to a certain degree we're taking the human's opinion out of that equation and letting the numbers tell us the answer to our question rather than a person's opinion.
So, Doctor, looking at what is being done today, just looking at all the shows out there, all the things you see in social media, just the clips of shorts on certain channels, what is your opinion about how the science community as a whole that are trying to do something, because it's a really small number that are openly studying the Bigfoot and other cryptids out there? What is your opinion about how they're going about this these days?
I don't belong, when I think about the groups that might be doing that, I think about, is it the Olympic Project?
Mm-hmm.
And I think about North American. No.
Go ahead.
I don't
go into that. Why not?
I don't think BFRO is doing it. It continues to do observational science.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but sightings still boil down to opinion and observation. I do see some mapping projects of populations of Bigfoot across the United States coming out of the BFRO database.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly think that's a good thing. But it really depends, based on my experience with BFRO at least, it really depends upon the leanings or the bias of the group leader. Lori, and this isn't a criticism of Lori, it's just how she runs her expeditions. We never really did any experiments in Lori's group. We went out, it was observational science. But Charlie, on the other hand, oftentimes puts out little experiments to see if he can get any results from a Bigfoot. And so I don't, of course, Dr. Meldrum comes to mind as, being on the forefront of doing experimental, what I would call experimental science on Bigfoot. The study that comes to mind off the top of my head isn't so much his casts and that kind of thing, but his study. I don't know if many viewers have watched the video on him testing the locomotion of humans and seeing if humans are able to replicate the Bigfoot walk.
Yeah, I did.
And again, they had to crunch some numbers to get to their conclusions on that. And so I think we need both more lab experiments like that, but also we need more field experiments out there. And I just gave a good example of one with the tree knocks. You could follow a similar design with structures. Either add your own structure into an area that Bigfoots already have structures, or take away a structure that they've already put in there, and then observe the behavior, observe if that structure is somehow replaced, what happens with that. And again, those behaviors can be coded into numbers and crunched and analyzed statistically rather than just observationally. I'm not sure, Matt, if I'm answering your question or not, to be honest with you.
No, you are absolutely.
Okay.
Looking at obviously the data that we've all been collecting over the years, and just from what you've been able to see out there, because obviously, let's be honest, aside from, and I believe the government has way more information out there on these creatures than we could ever imagine. So besides what experts they have that we don't know about, there aren't really any civilian experts that really know a ton about them. What is your thoughts on about just the general intelligence or the self-awareness, family kind of structure that you feel that these beings are capable of?
Their intelligence, insufficient data. I think that we attribute a lot of instinctual behaviors to intelligence. One of the, people calling them intelligent is one example, because they can be so elusive in the woods. Well, predatory behavior is an instinct, and it comes with elusiveness in the woods and stalking as part of that instinct. That's not intelligence, that's instinct. Curiosity is another one, because they frequently will sit in the woods on the fringes and observe humans or observe children. Okay. Well, again, that could also be stalking behavior. That could be just watching play. Play, interestingly enough, is an instinct as well. I was surprised to discover that when I did my research. And I think that's another thing, people see the videos of the mom grabbing the infant by the arm and lifting the infant up into its arms and scattering out of the frame. I don't know who has that video or did that video. And they say, yeah, look, they're so human. They're so intelligent. They keep their children and care for their children just like humans do. Well, the bad news about that is parenting and maternal and paternal abilities are an instinct as well.
Agreed.
And so I don't think we've done the research to attribute a lot of their behaviors to instinct. Territoriality. Another one I was surprised at that I discovered was tribalism is an instinct for protecting the tribe. And so I did a whole show on this. I can't remember all the different instincts that come into play. But I think before we start assigning the point is, I think before we start assigning a higher cortical function, cortical being the gray matter of your brain that humans have, and we're one of the species that has the most, and that's part of what makes us human and part of what makes us intelligent. But I think before we start assigning intellect to a lot of these behaviors, we need to investigate and rule them out as instinctual behaviors first.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with the aspect of the children and taking care of them. You can point to many different types of animals out there that instinctually will care for their children like that. Lyson Firefear wants to know a question for Doc. Why do you think people are having a harder time believing something exists than choosing to label all the eyewitnesses' testimony and recorded footage as hoaxes? A long question. Take your time.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, one, I think there's a number of reasons. I'm 66. I turned 66 a couple months ago, or a couple weeks ago. My whole life, I've been raised to believe Bigfoot is a legend, a fantasy legend. And I think a lot of the people in the general population were raised with that same mindset. So as a result of that, by the time, I guess some kids get into Bigfooting early if their parents are into it.
Mm-hmm.
But before the typical United States adult gets exposed to Bigfoot, I think they have years of conditioning and being told that no, it's just a myth, it's a legend, it's a fairy tale. So I think that's one thing. We're taught to be biased against the existence of Bigfoot within our society.
Yep.
I went to a conference, and the expert, big names on the panel stage, who I won't share all their names, but they were some of the biggest names that you repeatedly see at the major regional or national conferences. And at the question and answer period, somebody walked up to the mic and asked, "What are your thoughts about Bigfoot and mind speak?" And it was directed at one particular person who travels the world looking for Bigfoot and other cryptids. And he sat forward in his seat and put his hands on his forehead, pretending real hard to concentrate, and then said, "Did you get my answer?" And to me, in my book, I talk about something called incredulity bias.
Mm-hmm.
The word incredulous is something so far out of our worldview that we have this gut emotional, typically intense, unbelievable reaction to it. And so that's what I call incredulity bias. And I think a lot of people have that same kind of sense of incredulity when being told that Bigfoots exist, or they might be telepathic, or some of the more woo kind of experiences that people report. I think most non-Bigfoot citizens are going to respond to those things with incredulity bias because it's so far out of the realm of their world view. There's no way that it could be that.
Right. Good answer. One of the things that we had talked that you had mentioned, I wrote a couple notes down. Why and how will psychological science help?
Okay. Well, I think I spoke to that a little bit when I was talking about how experimental psychology seems to be a perfect fit.
Yes.
For Bigfoot, because Bigfoot's elusive. Intelligence can be elusive. Bigfoot shares many of the same qualities that psychology has tackled in humans. And so I think that puts us in a unique position to tackle those with Bigfoot as well. So I think that's the big thing. Secondly, what experimental psychology brings to the table is an experimental design and an experimental question that we're trying to answer on the front end ahead of time, and then developing an experiment to answer that question. I gave you an example of an experiment of how to parcel out human influence over the wood knocks.
Right.
Okay. Design an experiment, but then again, we crunch the numbers. And I hate to keep coming back to statistics, but it's, again, it's the language of science, numbers, and it takes a lot of opinion, strength of personality, and other biases out of the equation in a way that allows us to be more objective. So I think that's part of how it helps. I think the other part, the first half of my book, well, I've been talking a lot about science, and that's in part 2 of my book, which is a single volume. I call it book 2, but it's all
and guys,
single volume.
Not to interrupt you, John, I just want to let you guys know in the description, there are links to his book and to other things for John, Dr. Baranchock, that you guys can just click and go to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But the first book is more of just kind of an introduction to Sasquatch, some psychological principles that come to bear and can affect us in our expeditions and how we perceive and what we perceive as Sasquatch. But then the bulk of the first book spends time. I've worked with a lot of vets with war trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with a lot of traumatic brain injury folks with PTSD from their accident.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're treating those folks after the fact, what you're doing is reconditioning their fight-flight response and their anxiety to stay calm. Well, in my book, I outline a variety of procedures and go into great depth teaching people how to reprogram their fight-flight response so that when they have an intense encounter, they can remain relatively calm. You don't want to be relaxed when you got a Bigfoot, 30 feet in front of you. But how to teach yourself to be calmer in encounter situations and make the moves that you want to. And so through that, in my book, I teach people 3 relaxation techniques. I teach self-hypnosis. I teach something called stress inoculation, which is I think the best technique if you want to reprogram your fight flight to stay calmer.
What exactly is that, John?
So you first learn to get deeply relaxed, as you're practicing relax, if people have ever heard of systematic desensitization, it's the updated word for that. As you're learning to get good at relaxing, you make a encounter hierarchy, definitely including encounters you've already had, but also fantasizing encounters you might have. And you just kind of brainstorm those uncritically, and you end up with a list. Some people's list is just 10. I've worked with folks who have 20 or 30. I forget how many is. I use myself as an example in my book and make my own inoculation list, is what you're doing. So once you brainstorm this long list of encounters, you then rate their intensity from a 1, provoking only mild anxiety or discomfort, to 10, either about to have a panic attack or ready to run. Okay. And then to reprogram your fight flight response, you get relaxed and you start with the weakest encounter, the most innocuous encounter, and imagine that happening in your mind. But as that's happening in your mind, you feel your anxiety building, you stop that mental movie or that experience, relax back down to where you were before it started affecting your emotions, and then pick up with that mental movie or that encounter right where you left off.
Mm-hmm.
And you run that encounter again until you either reach the end or until it affects you again. You feel your anxiety coming up again.
Okay.
You stop, relax back down, keep running it. Once you can stay completely relaxed doing that 3 times in a row, you then go up the ladder to your next most intense encounter scenario, and you repeat that process. And so what you're doing is you're associating staying calm and alert with having a Bigfoot experience. And you pair that together enough, and what's going to happen is, instead of pooping your pants or pissing your pants, you're gonna feel calmer. And to that end, some people say, well, I've seen 15 Bigfoot and I've never pissed my pants or pooped my pants. I've met a lot of people who have had a lot of Class A experiences, and then all of a sudden something's about one is just different enough that they lose control of their body and their bowels and bladder. And so you never want to say never. And in fact, I always pack a change of underwear in my night ops pack in case that should ever happen to me. I don't want to sit around the rest of the night with poopy pants.
That's a great idea. And, I've had comments in my channel and other channels that I've done interviews on. Oh, wow, he saw a dog, man, big whoop. I wouldn't be scared. Let me tell you something, brother. Until you have that happen, don't ever say that, because me and my friends saw our lives flash before our eyes. So I wanted to say something real quick here before we move on. Masochist Mouse said, what would he have done if the person actually mind spoke back? I thought that was a great question.
Well, interestingly enough, so I think one of the unfortunate things in our community is most scientists aren't willing to look at the full picture. I'm trying to get this fuzz off of me. Most scientists will focus on flesh and blood to the exclusion of paranormal or woo.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you can't see it physically, touch it, it didn't happen. It's not valid. Think about back in the dark ages when you went to the barber instead of a doctor for medical treatment. What did you get? A bloodletting. Everybody needed a bloodletting.
Right.
And then this amazing invention comes along called the microscope. And for the first time, they can see germs. But people won't believe germs. People didn't believe germs could make them sick because they couldn't see them. And if that mentality continued to exist in the future, we'd still be getting bloodlettings today.
Yeah, how scary.
Because you know, there are things that we can't see and necessarily quantify that still go on. And so I think one of my biases is I don't believe, but I don't disbelieve in woo phenomena. I think just like flesh and blood phenomena, I think that needs to be investigated scientifically as well. And so that we can look at the whole picture and not just ignore one part of the picture, because we may miss something important if we don't look at the whole picture.
Yeah, I agree.
And so this isn't in my book, but I've had this experiment kicking around in my head that your question triggered. I'd like to get a psychic, a verified human psychic, and set up a gifting station and establish a relationship with a Bigfoot clan. And in gifting them, have the telepath ask them telepathically to bring a pine cone. You go back, if there's a pine cone sitting there, that would suggest maybe there was a connection there telepathically. But then in the next step, ask them to bring back something that's not as readily accessible in the woods, like deer bones or bear bones or something like that. If that comes back, that's even a stronger sign of there's telepathic communication going on there. Mm-hmm. But again, to bring it back to science, we can keep tracks of hits and misses. If they don't bring back the pine cone, if they don't bring back the bones, that's a miss. Then in the third condition, have the human telepath ask them to bring something that wouldn't necessarily be in the woods, but might be in a campground. And here the ethics of the study start getting a little gray, like a kid's toy or a ball that might be left, in a campground, or a stroller, whatever the case may be. Take some time to pick something that oftentimes is left behind in a campground and ask them to bring that back, because now they've got to exit their natural environment and to get this item and bring it back. And mm-hmm. So, and then the most ethically challenging part of this, but based on people like Scott Carpenter and some of my friends of mine who have had Bigfoots follow them back to their house, mm-hmm. ask them to bring something from somebody's home. Maybe one of the experimenters' homes, for example. And you can then again run a statistical analysis to see if there's a difference between those groups and whether there are more misses as it got more challenging, or are they able to accomplish those tasks consistently, in which case that would be very strong evidence of telepathic communication between the two. And again, we'll assign numbers and crunch those numbers to look at that data.
That's definitely a good way to get some of that. Before I get you on to talking about those butt puckering experiences that you've been teasing, I wanted to ask you about everybody in the chat, everybody that has gone to see, different groups on Facebook and in YouTube, and we've all seen them. People with the red circle around, hey, this is a cryptid, or this is a ghost. Pareidolia versus real pictures, real events going on, or just something that looks like it could be, but it's really just a log or a group of leaves making it look like a face. Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think if you've got to circle it, you shouldn't post it. Now, there are going to be some rare examples to that. I've seen a few. Okay, so I think there's a time and a place for everything, but as a general rule of thumb, if you got to circle it or draw an arrow to it, you shouldn't post it. With regard to pareidolia, I don't think people appreciate how easy it is to fall into that trap. Somewhere on my site, I went out into my backyard and just snapped some pictures of the woods behind my house, and then posted 2 pictures, and up front said, "This is not a Bigfoot. This is pareidolia. But can you see in the corner there what could be mistaken as Bigfoot? And do you see the tree arch here behind my house? These could easily be attributed to Bigfoot." People actually started getting into a debate about whether Bigfoot made those and whether Bigfoot was in my backyard or not. So, people don't read well. We got Bigfoot on the brain, and we all want to see one, and we leap to those conclusions. But if you want to see I've been kicking around the idea of laying out some guidelines on how to take photographs to minimize pareidolia. Because if you want to find a Bigfoot, be it a real Bigfoot or not, all you got to do, man, what is happening here? All you got to do is stand in the middle of a field surrounded by trees and take continuous snapshots in a 360-degree circle around that tree line. And I can guarantee you that somewhere in those multiple photos, you're going to see something looking like a Bigfoot, even though you never saw it before you took that picture. So I think it would be a good practice to be able to positively identify what you're taking a picture of as a Bigfoot before you snap the picture. Again, I understand that may not always be possible, but as a general rule of thumb, your eyes are going to be truer to you. Your naked eye is going to be truer to you than a photograph will be after the fact, right? Because you're going to see all kinds of stuff in those photographs. And so I think I'll take it one step further and say that people putting up pareidolia pictures or pictures with circles or arrows, I think they're really hurting the community. I think we got enough bad PR with the general public and the scientific community to begin with. And I think that just reinforces the idea that geez, look at these folks. Everything they see is Bigfoot.
Oh yeah.
And so it really hurts us more so than it helps us. The only benefit I see to it is the people that put up the picture. If it's one of these sites that accepts all comers and is uncritical and accepting, whether it's pareidolia or not, the only, putting it up on that kind of site gets you all kinds of pats on the back and recognition, but it doesn't help the community or the field.
I agree. And I also agree. There's some channels and people out there that just everything they see is ready to be marked with that red circle, and it just gets really really ridiculous. So I agree with you. It needs to stop and be a kibosh put on that. Let's see here if there's any questions here. None really right now. So moving ahead, I've been really excited to hear about these two experiences that you've had. And again, you've been teasing it to me with, and I love the way you put it, two butt puckering experiences. So would you mind, letting us in on that?
Not at all. Not at all. And one I'll try and use as a teaching story. So the first one that I experienced, Lori Wade, on her expeditions typically has a guest speaker. And I was fortunate enough early on in attending her expeditions to meet Scott Carpenter as a guest speaker. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yep.
What a guy, and what a contribution in setting up your GoPros to film behind you. What a incredible idea.
We lost a good guy too.
Yeah. So of course, when he did his presentation, he talked a lot about him cloaking. And as he shared some of his experiences, he shared cloaking. And I think this must have been my second or third expedition. And, I was still full of myself, I guess, and I thought I knew better. So I was skeptical. I came away from his presentation skeptical about Bigfoot's being able to cloak or vanish in front of your eyes. About a month later, I had the itch to go Bigfooting, but I couldn't get anyone to go with me. And in doing this, I discovered a habituation site in a place called Johns Mountain Federal Wildlife Management, camping area or whatever. I just cruised around looking for an area that seemed squatchy to me. And I found this, it's only a 50-minute drive from my house. I found this one group camping area that had ridges coming down to the base of both sides of the campground, timber, a path that ran a couple miles out of the campground back to a huge forested mountain. And on the left side, if you're facing into the area, just entering it, there was a stream or a creek running into the river across the street from this group campground. And so I thought, well, boy, this sure looks squatchy to me. So because there was no one with me, because there was no one with me, and I bought Scott Carpenter's book, Nephilim Among Us Revisited. And in that book, he takes while he's filming about what's following behind him, he shows you a still capture of an image of what's following him. Then he cleans it up on the computer and shows you the clean version. And then he had an artist render a drawing or an artistic interpretation of it. And I unfortunately bought that book. I grew up in the country my whole life and was never afraid to go in the woods. I played in the woods my whole childhood. But after I looked at those pictures, I was scared to go into the woods by myself, because some of those photos look like Bigfoot.
Oh yeah.
Some of those photos look like just something, a monster out of a horror show.
Too.
Yeah. And some of them look like aliens. And so I came away from reading his book scared to go into the woods by myself. So I decided to take my pit bull mix Red with me as an early alert, if nothing else. And so we sat up, we got there, pulled I have a mini trailer that I squatch out of, got camp set up, and then walked back towards that mountain along the creek to look for footprints or any sign. We couldn't find any sign. So by the time we got back to camp, it was time to cook dinner. Cook dinner. It's coming up on dusk, still daylight. And I'm just sitting in my chair, getting motivated to clean up the aftermath of my meal. And I have Red tied to a tree on his leash with 100-foot rope so that he could move. Oh boy. So that he could move freely, but still, have mobility. And he's just laying 5 feet from me. We're sitting at the campfire as dusk is approaching. And this point, I had this dog a couple years. And all of a sudden, he sits up on his hindquarters. He's laying down, sits up on his hindquarters, and sticks his nose straight up perpendicular to the sky and sits there for 5 minutes just sniffing the air. And after 5 minutes I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? After 5 minutes of doing that, he brings his head down and goes into a frightened attack mode, barking and snarling and snapping, kind of lunging forward, but not really wanting to go forward, just kind of a one leap bluff charge, if you will. Mm-hmm. And he's just going on and on and on and on and on and on. So I said, well, okay, Red, let's go check it out. So I went back to my truck, got my red headlamp. And when I went back to my truck, old Red climbed under my trailer. And he wasn't coming out without me dragging his butt out. He was not moving out. And I didn't want to force him to do anything he didn't want to do. So I said, okay, I guess I'm on my own. So I started walking, and no lie, as I started walking forward with Scott Carpenter's stories of cloaking in mind, I put my hands out in front of my body for fear of walking, bumping belly to belly with a Bigfoot cloaked in front of me. So I didn't want to bump body to body with a cloaked Bigfoot, but I literally walked to the street with my hands out for fear of bumping into a cloaked Bigfoot. Looked up and down the road, didn't see a thing. Walked a little bit up and down the road, didn't see a thing. Walked back to my campsite, coaxed Red out from under the trailer, sat in front of the campfire. Red was sitting closer this time. 3 minutes later, Red gets up from laying down. He was laying at my 2 o'clock position, or 10 o'clock position, excuse me. He gets up and moves to my 2 o'clock position, sticks his nose up in the air like that again, but this time only for about 3 seconds. And when he comes down with his nose again, he goes into this frightened attack mode, growling and snarling and snapping and lunging. And as he's doing that, I've gone back and measured the distance. 90 feet from me, a sapling tree with some brush around the base of it starts rattling. And from that location and over Red's growls, I hear this. And that's when my butt puckered, because there are bear in the area. I've heard them. That wasn't a bear call. Mm-hmm. There are a couple big cats in the area. It wasn't a cat call. That was a Bigfoot call. And so with my butt puckered, I stood up, walked to my truck, and I carry a .45 Smith & Wesson military police pistol with me. And I went and unholstered my pistol, closed my door, the growling and the bush rattling and the commotion going on all this time, which it was just a few seconds. I mean, it's, you know, and I chamber around. And no sooner that pistol emitted the sound of a round chambering, everything got quiet.
That's interesting.
Everything got quiet. And we were unmolested for the rest of the night.
See, that too, I mean, number one, I've for a long time been talking with a number of people. It's so obvious that they are in the trees, that they climb up in those trees and they're hiding. And I believe that they're cloaked the majority of the time too. There are some really, really good couple videos out there. I don't know if you've seen some of the cloaking videos that have popped up on the internet, but there's one from A Flash of Beauty, the Bigfoot video you and I talked about. They have this one woman was actually discussing her experience of seeing a Bigfoot kind of cloak like the Predator from the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. And just as she's talking about it, one runs through the foliage and you could see everything opening up as if a person runs through it, and there was nothing there. And she said, "Did you guys see that?" There's another one where another gentleman just happens to catch it. Looks exactly like the Predator movie. This thing is right by a branch and foliage, and it runs and the thing moves. So I've been talking about those lately, but also anyone that says, you know, if they're out there, they're just dumb primates, or no, they're not, because they know 100% what weapons are. So that's a beautiful testimony about them knowing what those guns are and what they do. A couple questions. First and foremost, you know, and some of the people have actually in the chat commented, and I'm hopefully getting back to some of them. Where do you think these things are coming from, Doc? Now, obviously, there's a lot of discussion about some of them coming from other dimensions or other planets. They're wearing, you know, possibly a biological spacesuit, yada, yada. Where do you think they're coming from, first and foremost?
I don't know. I don't have a clue. Again, to me, that harkens back to the origin theories. And like that, I don't think we have enough data to know for sure.
Okay.
Sorry to have such a humdrum answer, but you know, I really don't have a clue. I think we need to, and we're not going to figure that out unless we shift away from observational research. Not shift away from it as in no longer do it, but shift into more experimental research to figure that kind of thing out.
I agree. And that's not a cop out in any way. I mean, you're admitting you don't know. You're not saying, well, let me throw all this yada at you. And even though I don't believe it or know, well, let me throw in, you've mentioned, some of the woo connected to these Bigfoot sightings and things. Now, there's actually been for quite a long time some sightings with these Bigfoot out there that whenever there's also a UFO sighting in the same night, some people have seen Bigfoot, and not only them around the same area as these UFOs are sighted, they're carrying or holding an orb of light. Any thoughts on what's going on there?
No, I've seen one UFO in my life buzz by my house when I was a kid. Looked like a meteorite, or a meteor. Actually, it was about the size. It was big. It was bigger than a Volkswagen, and but that changed courses 5 times from the time I saw it until it got out of sight. But I don't know. Stan Gordon is, I think, the big name in the relationship between UFOs and Bigfoot. And again, I as you probably know, there are so many rabbit holes you can chase. I'm trying to stay a little bit narrowly focused in what I can manage and manipulate with a small group of people. So, I think we're a long way off from understanding the origins and whether they're interdimensional, alien, or only flesh and blood, a relic Tom. I think we're a long way from that.
Do you have any thoughts? And I'm not trying to pin you into anything and get you stuck on something. I'm just curious. Do you think there's a possibility they're the missing link, that they're that they're the Gigantopithecus, or is it just, again, I'm just not sure. I'm not going to throw it out
there. Yeah, I'm not sure. There are a lot of appealing physical theories out there. Missing link, Gigantopithecus,
right?
Others, I think looking at those things needs to continue, but it's striking to me. I just posted this in another discussion today. We only have 2 complete fossil records of species in the world: horses and elephants. All the other fossil records are incomplete. And so, I think one of the risks, and so that harkens of the whole evolutionary theory. And, I think we got to be careful putting all our eggs in a basket that has only 2 complete fossil records. And that's not to say we shouldn't go there or look there, but hearkening back to something I said earlier, we got to look at the whole picture, not just part of the picture.
Agreed. I'm going to wait on the question I was just going to ask you. How about the second puckering event that occurred with?
Yeah. So I'm going to just, if you'll indulge me, take this as a teaching opportunity as well.
For sure.
One of the statistical procedures that you can use is correlational analysis. So there's a difference between a coincidence, a correlation, and a causality. And for most of the community, if we see a Bigfoot print, if we see a print that looks unhuman, is a size not of a human, there's an immediate tendency to jump to a Bigfoot caused that to happen. We jump right to causality. Okay. but it may just be a correlation, or it may be a coincidence. And this story kind of illustrates that. But a coincidence is something that just randomly happens. I think the classic example is in baseball. You know, the pitcher wears his polka dotted underwear for a game and pitches a no-hitter, and then continues to wear his polka dotted underwear each time he pitches, thinking that that's going to allow him to pitch well again. That's a coincidence, and that's superstition.
Mm-hmm.
A correlation is when there is a relationship between two things, but it's not a causal relationship. So the example I give of this is ice cream. Does increasing temperatures cause ice cream to melt, or is it correlational? Is there a correlation there? Most people will say, heck yeah, the hotter it gets, the more ice cream will melt. But it's not a causal relationship. And it's not a causal relationship because once you get something frozen below freezing, let's say you freeze something down to a minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. As you raise that temperature, that ice cream isn't going to melt. It's going to stay frozen because you're raising that temperature up to that critical freezing point. So if increasing temperatures caused ice cream to melt, it would start melting no sooner you start going from minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 90 and all the way up. So that's an example of a correlation. There's a relationship there, but it's not a causal relationship.
Okay.
And then causal is when, we know, just like it says, we know something, we know what caused something, we know the nail in our tire caused our tire to develop a flat. There's a clear, undeniable causal relationship there. Causal relationships have a 100% correlation. Every time X happens, Y happens. Okay? So now on to the story. And I'll circle back around. So this was in Tennessee. NDAs prevent me from telling you where. But went out, usually in BFROs, you go out in a group of 3 to maximum of 6 for night ops, and everybody's divided into small groups. But for this one, there were 15 of us that went to this location. And back in the Civil War, when the Civil War started, the draft was called consignment. It wasn't called a draft. It was called consignment. And this guy didn't want to enter the Civil War, so he avoided consignment by going up into the Tennessee hills and with his family and building this log cabin. Well, this log cabin is still intact in this place that we were. So all 15 of us walked up to this log cabin. We had to cross 3 streams to get there. And then we broke up into 3 groups of 4 and a group of 3. 3 stayed at the cabin for a midway base camp rather. 1 went back down the hill and scouted around the base of the mountain. And then I was in one of 2 groups of 4 that was supposed to climb up this really slick deer trail to a fire road. And we were supposed to go opposite directions of the other group and meet around the back of the mountain. Well, it had been raining all the night before and most of that day. So getting up that deer trail, it was really slick, and you had to pick handholds and footholds very carefully. There was like clay under a clay substrate underneath there, so it was like walking on ice when it's with the clay being wet. We get up to the top. In fact, we were supposed to take a right, but we thought we were supposed to take a left, so we took a left. And uncharacteristically, I was in the lead. There were four of us as we started up this untrimmed fire road. The grasses were about up to our thigh. It was myself. Behind me was a guy named George Wrigley. Behind him was a guy named Dan Kegley, and behind him is Greg Ogilby. And these are all excellent BFRO researchers. So as we hadn't hiked 50 yards up this fire road, and I say, George, it's awfully quiet up here. All we can hear is the water running off the mountain and the trees still rustling in the breeze. You've always said that when Bigfoot around, the forest gets really quiet and still. Is this that kind of quiet? Well, usually when it's this quiet and a Bigfoot is around, your spidey senses will tingle. You'll start getting the hairs standing up on your neck and that kind of thing. And none of us are feeling that way. So I don't think that's the kind of quiet we're dealing with. So we keep hiking up this forest road, and we're carrying a walkie-talkie, trying to get a hold of the group we think we're going to meet around the backside. We walked for a couple hours up this fire road, and we couldn't get them on the walkie-talkie. But as we were walking, that silence was deafening. Throughout our section of forest, we didn't see any deer. We didn't spook any turkeys. No chipmunks or squirrels scattering in the in the leaves. No signs of pig activity. We finally got far enough up the hill that we connected with the other group on the walkie-talkie and discovered that we took a wrong turn, and somehow, I'm still not clear how, but we will never meet these guys around the back of the mountain. So we've been hiking quite a while at this time. So we turn around and start going back in that same order. No, not in that same order. As we're walking back down, George is in front of me. I'm behind George. Dan Kegley is behind me, and Jesus, I forgot. I'm blocking on the other guy's name right now. I said it earlier. He's in the back. Mark Ogilby's in the back. And so these guys, I have training in hypnosis. And so these guys liked hearing me talk about hypnosis, and we would discuss how hypnosis might influence people's encounter experiences. And we were talking about that as we were about 300 yards from the deer trail to get back down to the cabin. And I don't even remember what I said about hypnosis, but whatever I said struck a nerve in George, and he stopped dead in his tracks, pivoted, and took 2 steps towards me and said, "J." And all he could get out was the first syllable of my name. And all of a sudden, we heard what sounded like a bomb going off up the mountain, but just up the mountain from us. It was a tree pushover. And when I say it sounded like a bomb going off, that is no exaggeration. It was loud. And so immediately after the tree broke, you heard what sounded like a landslide tumbling down the mountain towards us.
Oh boy.
To the point that, you know, when rocks or logs tumble down a mountain and they hit something, they become airborne and they stop the noise until they hit the ground again, and then you can hear them again. That was going on all around us. You could hear what sounded like a major landslide coming down the mountain at us. George and I scurried a little bit up the trail or down the trail towards the deer trail. Mark Ogleby scattered back up the trail, and Dan Kegley, bless his heart, he just pivoted on his foot, looked up the mountain, and went to pull his K-bar knife, because he was, while we were fleeing, he was getting ready to fight what was ever coming at us. But I was envisioning, based on the sound, huge boulders coming down on top of us and huge logs. And, you know, I didn't want to have any part of that. But that, interestingly enough, no trees, no pebbles, no rocks, no leaves ever hit the forest road. Despite it was 14 seconds of that landslide sound. We've got it recorded. And it was just so real, because again, in my mind, I'm expecting these big boulders to be on the road. And we look up the mountain trying to figure out what's going on. And when I looked up, at the same time I saw the particles in the air, I smelled loam. I don't know if you know what loam is or what loam smells like. If you compost your garbage and get that really sweet, rich, dark compost soil with that kind of that smell to it, that's what loam is. People use it to enrich the soil in their gardens. In this case, it was from the leaves, rotting on the ground and the dust being kicked up.
Gotcha.
So we smelled loam. We spent about 35, 40 minutes trying to find Bigfoot evidence, trying to find any kind of evidence. Couldn't do it. Right after the bomb went off, guys from the cabin called up and said, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that tree push over?" It was like, no shit, buddy. It was right above our heads. How could we not?
Right.
So because we couldn't find anything, we had the grand plans of, and that was the butt puckering part. When that landslide sound came in,
that'll do it.
I was afraid for my life. So we start walking back down towards the deer trail. And as we're walking down the deer trail, the guys at the cabin radio us again. And they say, "Are you guys on the deer trail or on the forest road?" "We're on the forest road." Okay, 10-4. We get to the deer trail, and again, it was literally just a steep, muddy deer trail, pretty steep. You had to really carefully pick your footholds and your handholds to get down it without falling. And we're about halfway down it, and they radio us again. Are you on the fire road or the deer trail?" Well, now we're on the deer trail. Why do you keep radioing us, for goodness sake?
Right.
Well, when you were on the fire road, there were several either eye shines or sphere. What did you call them? Orbs following you about 30 yards behind you.
Wow.
And now that you're down on the deer trail, they're following you down the deer trail. So we pivot around as quickly as we could and look up the trail. We don't see a thing. Nothing is behind us. So we make our way back down to the cabin. All 15 of us now are gathered at the cabin, resting up before we hike the rest of the way down the mountain, across the streams, back to our car and back to base camp. And kind of stretched out pretty good length. And for some reason, we're all facing, there was a patch of forest between the property of the cabin and the trail, and then forest behind the trail. And for some reason, everybody was just facing the deer trail, chatting. And all of a sudden, I hear somebody say, "Look at that." And then I hear somebody says, "Yeah, look at that." And then somebody on the other side of me says the same thing. What are you guys seeing? Look up into the trees. There are peepers up in the trees. And I look, and before I know it, probably within a 50-yard span in the forest between in the trees between the property of the cabin and the deer trail, you'd see a little eye pop out from behind a tree, pop back in, and then pop back out the other
Tree
side.
peeking. Definitely
Yeah.
one of their well-known things that they do.
But this wasn't just happening behind one tree. This was happening behind a bunch of trees. It was hard to count because you couldn't account for them shifting positions with trees and moving around. But we figured at least 20 infant or juvenile Bigfoots were peeping at us through the woods as we were watching them.
You saw that many eye shines?
Yes.
Wow.
And that went on for about 20 to 25 minutes. All of us just sitting there watching this happen. Never did we see anything more than what would have been 3 feet high on the tree. We never saw a big, grapefruit size eyes step out from behind a tree. We never saw any evidence of an adult. So after it stopped, we went back to base camp, determined the next morning to get back up there because we had put an X in the ground right where the landslide thing happened.
Okay.
We were going to go back up there in the day because that happened at about 3 o'clock in the morning. We were going to get back up there and look for more evidence. But all of us were in our 40s and 50s at that point and pretty stiff and sore the next day. And no one was too inclined to take that hike again. But there was a guy, Daniel Mixon, I think is his name. He's fresh out of the Army, big deer hunter. He says he's going up there. We told him where to look for the X. He goes up there and looks for the X, and I'll be damned if he didn't find an adult print real close to that X. So he comes running down, rushing back into base camp, running into base camp, saying he's found an adult Bigfoot print, and him and Tom Bruins go up and cast this footprint. While they're casting this footprint, they start looking around for other evidence. Now, when we were looking for evidence, we were looking up the mountain because that's where everything came from.
Mm-hmm.
But as they were killing time, they went to the downside of the fire road, and they noticed a tree right on the precipice of the fire road with a fresh bark tear on it, 15 foot up the tree. And when they looked at the base of the tree, they found another partial adult print that, it was like the front half of the foot was on the ground and the back half and the heel, There was nothing there to make a print because it was a drop off. And so they looked down that drop off over the edge of the road, and about 10 feet down, it leveled out into a cliff. And on that cliff, they counted between 35 and 40 juvenile and infant Bigfoot prints.
Wow.
So now to bring the science back into it. Can we say for sure that those prints were made by a Bigfoot? Do we have coincidence, a correlation, or can we say for sure Bigfoot caused those prints? And I don't want you to answer it or anyone in your audience.
Right.
The answer is we can't say Bigfoot's caused it. We didn't see the Bigfoots make those prints, and we have no numbers on those numbers to run on those prints to do statistical analysis to help us answer that question.
What color was the eye shine, John?
Red.
Oh, well, there's something that makes you think there too. Not many animals, even in the animal world, that have red eye shine. There's like alligators that have it, and other than that, other than like an owl, a certain owl, not many have red eyes.
Yeah. So I even catch myself when I tell this story wanting to go causal, because there, it's sure not a coincidence that we had the pushover. What I think probably was a bluff charge. I think we might have stopped right by the nursery or the playground and got bluff charged to be scared off. But can I say for sure that that's a causal relationship? As an experiencer, I want to say yes. As a scientist, I can't say yes. I can say there's probably a strong correlation there, but there's not enough there for causality.
That's really, really an amazing story. There's been a lot of experiences, not only with cryptids, but like in the paranormal world with ghosts and things, where people have heard inside of buildings or houses, they hear like breaking glass or wood breaking or something. They go to where that sound came from. No broken glass, nothing of the sort. In the woods, EVPs of, not EVPs, I'm sorry, recordings of exactly what happened with you and your friends in the woods, with those trees breaking, sounding like something's, tumbling down the hill, maybe a boulder breaking tree. Nothing. What are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that sound may be coming from, in between the veil between our world and theirs? That's what I think personally.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry I'm responding.
That's okay.
I don't know with so many questions. But if it was between the veil, I would have hated to hear how it sounded if it was all in our dimension. If the veil would, suppress some of the sound or not, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, you're a scientist, so you have been taught, unless you have the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on and hypothesize out the yin yang, but, I think we need to move a little bit closer to harder sciences than observational science.
I agree. And you know what? That's why I'm so glad that there are people like you out there that have been, writing about this, have been, talking about this out there at conferences through the years and things. I know you're winding down about that type of stuff, but you've been a very integral voice for these types of things for years, Dr. Baranchock, and I applaud you for it.
Well, thank you. I'm distancing myself somewhat from Facebook because of toxicity. But if anybody ever needs a conference speaker or a festival speaker, I'm game.
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not going to say a date or anything, but I was talking to my wife. We're thinking about sometime in the next, maybe year, putting one on. I would love to have you as a guest and speaker.
Oh, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll keep everybody in the know on that. Anybody that has any questions for Doctor, please, throw them up in all caps if you want. We're going to be winding down here in a little bit. It's getting here a little late. How fast? I always get amazed at how fast on these live streams.
Time flies.
Yeah, it goes by so quickly. Other cryptids out there, Doc. What are some of the other ones out there that have really, grabbed your mind? That something that you'd really, if maybe you could wind the clock back a little bit on the age and you to get into, studying them scientifically. What other cryptids out there would you like to study?
I think as a Bigfoot researcher, we're obligated to research Dogman.
Mm-hmm.
It appears that their territories overlap. And it appears that we experience some of the same phenomena from both Bigfoot and Dogman in terms of growls, and I'm told they can push things over and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think at some point we've got to be able to tease out Dogman from Bigfoot, especially if we don't have prints to help us do that and don't have a visual confirmation to help us do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that Bigfoot researchers would do well to investigate Dogman to help rule out those influences in our Bigfoot research.
And I applaud you for that statement. Strangely enough, what I've noticed since, I came out a few years ago and spoke about my experience and have started to get involved in research in my channel was the push from people in the there shouldn't even be a side, like from the Sasquatch community and the Dogman community. There was a really bad kind of, smacking of heads, if you will, not even, an easy kind of disagreement. There was very ugly, disagreements about the two, which makes no sense to me. You have, cryptids out there. There should be no infighting and pulling in and say, hey, we're only believing in Bigfoot. Well, if you believe in Bigfoot, how could you wipe aside that there's a possibility of other things out there like that? So that seems to have been going away. I'm happy to say, since I started my channel, there's been a lot less pull on that and less infighting. I agree with you. If you're going to be out there studying Bigfoot, you might as well be studying them as well, because you're going to come across, just as you made a great point, it seems like their range and areas of living do cross.
Mm-hmm.
So a great point.
Yeah, I what was I thinking? What did I want to say? I don't know. Skipped my mind. Must have been a lie.
Jack Spring asks, and I know what your answer is, does the doctor think Bigfoot is physical or nebulous?
I'm open to all possibilities.
Yeah, you have to be. Onto a subject real quick. I just real fast.
I've got time.
What has been going on a lot lately a lot of shows on it. I'm going to be, delving into it. I'm going to be going soon, actually, to some places that are they're considered some of the most haunted places out there. I'm going to start going and doing some recordings and lives from there. A lot more. And I'll get to your smiling after. I know what you're thinking. A lot more of these things going on these days. A lot more hauntings going on. A lot more seems like people are getting to see proof of ghosts out there, proof of, another life out there. What is your just quick opinion on that? And then we'll get to what you're laughing about, because I do know what you're going to say.
I believe in spirits. I believe in ghosts. I'm suspect, frankly, of the technology, the spirit boxes, and there's another kind of electronic device that researchers use frequently in those investigations. I'm skeptical of those because they're programmed by a human on some level.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, I do believe in ghosts and spirits, and I'm not sure what else to say.
Now, what you were smiling about, go ahead and mention that. You're talking about a hijacker.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're concerned about a Bigfoot following us home. I'd rather have a Bigfoot follow me home than a ghost or a spirit follow me home.
Funnily, my wife has been like, I don't want you going to those places. She's seen some of the shows I've watched. Specifically, I like to really watch, like, for instance, one of the shows is Destination Fear. They get these 4 friends, 2 siblings and 2 friends of the group. They'll go to a really highly haunted, well-known place, and they'll like sleep overnight in this spot. And all. She doesn't like to watch that stuff, but she'll catch me watching some of it. And I brought to attention one of them. They went to this one place and it's called Eloise Asylum. It's in Michigan, in the Detroit area, and they caught like a picture of like a phantom standing behind somebody. It wasn't Destination Fear, it was Expedition X, Josh Gates' show, and they go to some of these different places for cryptids and ghosts and the whole gamut there. But she said, you are not going there and bringing something here with my fam. She's, I don't want you doing that. So BJ Lapierre is here in the group, in the chat. She's really well-known author as well, and she's really good about knowing about crystals and protections. And Rye Voss has been in here, and those two, I'm like, I'll get protection, don't worry, I'll see a priest before I go. She's like, I don't want you to go. She's like, if you bring something to my house, I will kill you. So
I can't tell you how many hours I've spent squatching outside of graveyards. The connection between graveyards and Sasquatch, it fascinates me some.
And Dogman as well have been really known to be around like Indian mounds, like the Serpent Mound in Ohio. They've found one near it. There's something about that correlation. I agree with you there.
Yeah. So it's an amazing world we live in, universe we live in. That's for sure.
It is. And Logan, I can answer this for you. I 100% agree that a dogman can be both spiritual and flesh. What me and my friends saw when we were 14, we saw this thing in both forms of being a flesh animal, which we thought it only was at first, until it stood up and ran after us. And when it was leaving the building we were in, and it basically turned into an amorphous shadow and left. So we got to see supernatural things happened that just blew our minds. We thought we were sleeping. I thought I was asleep seeing the things I was seeing. And when I didn't wake up, I realized it was real. So, yes, Logan, I believe personally, people out there have had experiences with those things. They've seen them. They probably would disagree and think they're only natural beings. I myself have seen both.
A good Bigfooting buddy of mine, whose name I won't use, was invited to be a member of a haunting investigation in some hospital here, abandoned hospital or sanitarium in Georgia, supposedly very, very haunted. And just to keep it short, he was recording the EVPs, and they spent the night there and tried to provoke and didn't have any luck. And as they were packing up, 2 of the 4 people left the room, and he was following behind a woman who stepped back into the room and said, "I can't believe you," something to the effect, "I can't believe what a pussy you are, that you wouldn't show yourself to us," kind of taunting.
Provoking's not smart.
And they all 4 of them walked down the hall, and this guy was walking behind that girl, and all of a sudden she started screaming, and she stripped off her blouse, and there were 3 claw marks on her back. So that's not my story. That's somebody else's story that he shared with me. But as long as we were talking hauntings, I thought I'd share that story.
Oh yeah, there's and I always say this: anyone that wants to see where in my opinion, I don't know of any other channels out there that have the amount of paranormal supernatural shows on it. Discovery Plus has every channel, I believe, that's available on the planet. And you will see like that stuff, like the scratches happening like right when they happen, which is really disturbing to know that some of these, some of them are demonic, out there. When I had my experience, I went, I've talked about this, so I'll just use the abridged version. I went and saw my priest from our church because I was so disturbed by what happened. And, he talked about exorcisms, and, he was like, that stuff's real. And I've seen horrible things, and, those things can hurt people physically. And, so whenever I watch these shows and I see the welts coming up on their skin as they record, that's really scary and disturbing. So, people, making these beings angry and provoking is not a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I forgot the punchline to that story. He turned the equipment over to the main investigator, and 3 weeks later, he got a call from an investigator who said, "I want you to sit down before I tell you this." So he sat down. He said, "On the EVPs, right as she was being scratched, you can hear, 'Who's your huckleberry?'"
Oh man, that's scary. Doc Holliday.
Yeah.
That was his line. Wow, that's really scary. Oh man. Well, I'm going to tell you what, Doctor, this has been an absolute fabulous show having you on here, and an honor to have you on here. Is there anything that you would like to say to the people in the chat? Maybe let them know again where you're, it's in the description, but anything you'd like to let them know about where they can find your book and everything like that?
Well, first and foremost, just thanks for being here and listening to my propaganda. I appreciate it. My book is available on Amazon. It's called Grasping Sasquatch, Prepping for Scientific Field Research. 2 books in one. I'm doing a talk June 13th through 15th at Thunder Rock Campground in outside of Copper Hill, Tennessee, doing a little camp out, some squatching, and I think we've got 6 guest speakers. And in July, Manimal Research is also putting on their annual Squatch Out, which is always an awesome event. And we're going to be at Land Between the Lakes for that one.
Oh, wow.
And that's, I wish I could think of the dates off the top of my head, but that's in the middle towards the end of, I'm sorry. The other one was June, and towards the end of July, middle to end of July is the Squatch Out. Going to be speaking there. And other than that, that's about it. Just try and enjoy life.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what we're all trying to do again, especially the us older people who are trying to enjoy life for sure. Doc,
Yeah.
I want to thank you for all of our people who have come and gone in the chat, for myself, for Planet 412 as a whole, for everyone who's going to be watching this as the video sits there. I want to thank you. And again, say how much I was honored to have you on. It's been a long time coming. If you will wait for me in the green room, I will see you in a minute. All right.
It's been an honor for me, and I'd be happy to come back anytime. Thanks.
Absolutely. We will definitely have you back, Doc. Hold on for me for 1 second. Everybody, I want to say thank you for coming to the show tonight. Everybody in the chat who stuck with me, I appreciate it. It's always a joy to do these. We'll have more of the live streams coming up, as you've seen. I am doing more of them. We'll also, some new videos and shorts will be popping up. It's been busy around the 412 household lately. That's why things slowed. It's about to pick up big time here. So thank you, everybody, again for coming. And we will definitely see you guys next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as it greatly helps out the channel. I'll see you next time on Planet 412.